My name is Isabella Garcia. I am 31 years old, and I work as a commercial insurance underwriter in Connecticut. I assess risk for a living. I read balance sheets, track hidden liabilities, and calculate the exact moment a financial facade will crack. None of that prepared me for the morning I had to audit my own family. It was 9 a.m. on a Sunday. My front door rattled with 3 sharp, rapid knocks, the kind of knock that demands an audience. I opened the door to find my mother, Victoria, standing on the porch in a cashmere coat. She did not come to apologize for the 14 empty chairs at my engagement party the night before. She did not ask how the celebration went. She pushed past me, her heels clicking hard against the hardwood floor, and marched straight to the granite island in my kitchen. Her eyes locked onto the black velvet ring box sitting next to my coffee mug. "If you are going to humiliate us by marrying a mechanic," she said, her voice tight and clipped, "I at least want to see the cheap metal he bought on credit." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I walked over to the safe in the hallway, retrieved the heavy, cream-colored insurance appraisal Liam had handed me the night before, and placed it on the counter right next to her hand. She snatched the document. I stood there and watched her read. I watched her eyes track across the page, searching for a meager number to validate her disdain. I watched her gaze stop halfway down the sheet. Her breath caught in her throat. A harsh, jagged sound. The appraisal listed a flawless, custom-cut diamond. Valuation, $42,000. Paid in full via cashier's check. But the number was not what made the color drain from her neck. It was the billing information printed in bold ink at the top of the page. Liam Bennett, CEO, Bennett Heavy Fleet Solutions. Her grip on the cardstock loosened. The edge of the paper trembled against her manicured thumb. Her knees buckled, just a fraction of an inch, before she sank onto the nearest bar stool, like gravity had suddenly doubled. She was staring at a piece of paper that proved the man she had shunned held more wealth than our entire bloodline combined. Welcome back to Aura Vengeance. This is a place where we share stories of family betrayal, quiet strength, and the moment the truth finally catches up to the people who tried to hide it. How old were you when you realized your family cared more about their image than your happiness? Let me know your age in the comments, and be sure to subscribe. To understand why my mother looked like the floor had opened up beneath her, you have to understand the damage she tried to cause the night before. And to understand the night before, you have to go back 8 months, to the moment my family first decided Liam was a problem they needed to fix. 8 months before that piece of paper shattered my mother's reality, I brought Liam to our traditional Sunday dinner. To understand my family, you have to understand their currency. They do not trade in affection or loyalty. They trade in optics. Every decision is a calculated investment designed to project an illusion of elite status. My father, Richard, was a middle management corporate director. He held a title that sounded important on a business card, but carried very little actual equity. He leased a slate gray Mercedes S-Class that he parked at the very edge of the driveway, angling the front tires just so, ensuring the hood ornament was visible from the street. He spent his weekends polishing the chrome and complaining about the cost of premium gasoline. My older sister, Sophia, had married a man named Julian. Julian called himself a wealth manager. His primary skill was wearing bespoke Italian suits to casual family gatherings and using financial jargon to make simple concepts sound intimidating. He wore a Rolex that caught the dining room light and spoke loudly about market yields and venture capital. Then there was Liam. When Liam arrived at my parents' house that Sunday evening, he did not pull up in a leased luxury sedan. He drove a 1998 Ford F-150. The paint was faded on the passenger side panel. The engine possessed a low, heavy rumble that announced his arrival long before he reached the front steps. That truck had belonged to his late father. Liam could afford to drive any vehicle on the market, but he kept the Ford. He drove it because it reminded him of where he came from. He drove it to stay grounded. My parents did not see a sentimental heirloom. They saw a liability. I watched my mother stand by the front window, her hand parting the sheer curtains just enough to peer outside. Her posture stiffened the moment Liam killed the engine. I opened the front door. Liam walked into my parents' pristine, marble-floored foyer. He wore dark, clean denim and a fitted black button-down shirt. But he also wore his work boots. They were high-quality leather, but they were scuffed at the toes. When he reached out to shake my father's hand, I saw Richard's eyes drop to Liam's fingernails. Liam scrubbed his hands with industrial pumice soap every day, but there was always a faint, permanent trace of machine grease along his cuticles, the mark of someone who actually built things. My father accepted the handshake, but he pulled back a second too early. Dinner was served in the formal dining room. My mother brought out the good china, the plates with the gold rim that were usually reserved for holidays. It was a silent test, a way to see if the mechanic knew which fork to use. Liam sat next to me, his broad shoulders taking up a generous amount of space at the table. He unfolded his linen napkin, placed it on his lap, and thanked my mother for the meal. His manners were flawless. But in my family, manners without a prestigious job title meant nothing. Julian poured the wine. He swirled the red liquid in his glass, held it up to the light, and turned his attention across the table. "So, Liam," Julian said, offering a smile that did not reach his eyes, "Isabella tells us you work with machinery. What exactly is your day-to-day?" I cut my steak, keeping my eyes on my plate. I felt the sudden shift in the room's atmospheric pressure. "I am a heavy diesel mechanic," Liam said. His voice was calm, a deep baritone that carried no need for validation. The temperature at the table plummeted. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The only sound was the scrape of my mother's knife against her porcelain plate. "A mechanic," my father repeated, letting the words sit in the air like a spilled drink. "That is hard work, back-breaking work." "It keeps me busy," Liam replied. Julian leaned back in his chair, adjusting his silk cuffs. "Blue collar is the backbone of the country, man. Nothing to be ashamed of. Though I imagine the hourly rate makes it tough to build a real portfolio. You ever think about getting out of the garage?" I felt a surge of heat rise in my chest. I opened my mouth to intervene, to tell Julian that Liam's company serviced the very municipal infrastructure that allowed Julian to drive his leased cars on paved roads. But beneath the table, Liam placed his large, warm hand over my knee. A gentle squeeze, a silent command to let it play out. My father cleared his throat, adopting his best corporate mentor tone. "You know, Liam, it is never too late to pivot. There are some excellent night classes at the community college. Business administration, logistics. If you apply yourself, you could move up into management. Get out from under the chassis." Liam took a bite of his food, chewed slowly, and swallowed. He looked directly at my father. "I appreciate the advice, Richard, but I am pretty happy where I am." My mother let out a small, quiet sigh, the kind of sigh you reserve for a disappointment you expected all along. She looked at Liam like he was a charity case, someone to be pitied, someone who lacked ambition. Liam did not defend himself. He did not puff out his chest and declare that he owned the commercial repair enterprise. He did not tell them that he had 75 employees on his payroll, or that his municipal contracts were worth more than Julian's entire client roster. He sat there, ate his roast beef, and let them feel vastly superior. It was a brilliant red herring, and they swallowed it whole. Because of my job as an underwriter, I evaluate risk every single day. I look at businesses that project incredible success, and I find the structural rot hiding in the foundation. Sitting at that dining table, I audited my own bloodline. I saw Richard leasing a car to impress neighbors he did not even like. I saw Julian using big words to mask a deep, desperate insecurity. I saw my mother treating a good man like dirt because his boots were scuffed. They were hollow. Liam was solid. After dinner, the men moved to the living room while I helped my mother carry the dishes to the kitchen. The moment the swinging door closed behind us, Victoria dropped her polite facade. She grabbed my forearm, her fingers digging into my sleeve. "Isabella, what are you doing?" she hissed. "He is a grease monkey, a laborer. How are you supposed to build a life with a man who punches a time clock? Julian and Sophia are building a legacy. You are settling for a mechanic." "He is a good man, Mom," I said, pulling my arm away. "Good does not pay the mortgage in a respectable zip code," she fired back. "You are going to end up supporting him. You will be dragging dead weight for the rest of your life." She turned away, shaking her head as she loaded the dishwasher. The trap had been set. By staying silent, Liam had given them exactly what they wanted. A target, a reason to feel elite. They placed him in a box labeled worthless, cementing their disdain for the man I loved. But their false sense of superiority was dangerous. It made them arrogant. It made them believe I was weak for choosing him, and that my resources were still theirs to command. That arrogant assumption is exactly what gave my golden sister the confidence to call me 3 weeks later. She summoned me to a country club patio, ordered a $12 mimosa, and casually slid a piece of paper across the wrought iron table. A piece of paper that would force me to choose between funding her vanity or protecting my own future. Sophia was born to be displayed. She treated her life like a curated magazine spread, constantly searching for the right lighting, the right audience, and the right background. From the time we were children, my parents nurtured her aesthetic. She was the golden child. I was the backstage crew. While Sophia took European vacations and posted photos from yacht decks, I stayed in Connecticut, passed my licensing exams, and built a career evaluating risk. I became the family safety net. When my parents received a property tax delinquency notice 2 winters ago, my mother called me in tears. I wired the funds before my lunch break. When Sophia insisted on a destination wedding in Tulum, she claimed her budget fell short. I paid for the bridesmaid's villa because my father said a sister should always support her blood. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who funded their image while they took the credit. 3 weeks after Liam sat at our family dining table and absorbed their sneers, my phone rang. Sophia requested my presence at the Heritage Country Club for Sunday brunch. She did not phrase it as an invitation. She phrased it as a summons. I arrived at the club just after 11. The patio smelled of chlorine from the nearby pool and the sharp tang of fresh-cut grass. Sophia sat under a pristine white umbrella. She wore a crisp tennis skirt, despite the fact that she had never held a racket in her life. A half-empty mimosa rested next to her manicured hand. She did not stand up when I approached the table. She did not ask about my week, my job, or Liam. She simply tapped the seat across from her and launched into her agenda. "Julian has been under a lot of stress lately," she began, swirling the orange liquid in her crystal glass. "The market is unpredictable. We need something positive, something to remind everyone who we are." I signaled the waiter for black coffee. "What are you planning, Sophia?" "A 5-year vow renewal," she announced, her eyes gleaming with genuine self-importance. "It is going to be elegant. A twilight ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, 200 guests. We are hiring the photographer who shot the governor's daughter." I stared at her. 5 years of marriage is a quiet anniversary. It is a private dinner or a weekend away. A 200-guest twilight ceremony was not a celebration of love. It was a theatrical performance designed to prove a wealth they did not actually possess. "That sounds expensive," I said. My voice remained neutral. Sophia sighed, a dramatic flutter of her shoulders. "It is an investment in our social standing. Julian needs to project success to attract the right clients. But there is a small cash flow issue." She reached into her designer tote bag, pulled out a folded piece of thick ivory paper, and slid it across the wrought iron table. I let the paper sit there for a long moment before I picked it up. It was a vendor invoice from an elite floral boutique in Westport. The itemized list detailed imported Dutch peonies, cascading white orchids, and custom wrought iron trellises. The total at the bottom read $6,500. "Mom and Dad are tapped out right now," Sophia said, waving her hand dismissively, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. "The house needs a new roof, and Dad just renewed the lease on the Mercedes. I need you to cover this invoice. Just the florals. Julian will handle the rest." She took another sip of her drink, leaning back in her chair. She looked at me with an expression of total certainty. She expected me to pull out my checkbook right there on the patio. She expected the safety net to deploy, just like it always did. I looked down at the invoice. The numbers blurred for a fraction of a second. My mind flashed back to the Sunday dinner 3 weeks prior. I saw Liam sitting in my parents' dining room in his scuffed leather work boots. I remembered the cold, dismissive look on my mother's face. I remembered my father treating the man I loved like a peasant who needed a lecture on ambition. They had judged Liam for earning an honest living with his hands while sitting in a house funded by my quiet bailouts. My sister, the wife of a supposed wealth manager, was asking me to hand over thousands of dollars for dead flowers so she could pretend to be rich. As a commercial underwriter, my entire profession revolves around recognizing bad investments. You look at the history, you assess the current behavior, and you calculate the return. The return on my family was zero. They demanded capital, they demanded compliance, and they offered nothing but judgment in exchange. Something inside my chest shifted, a heavy iron door swinging shut and locking into place. I placed the invoice back onto the glass tabletop. I placed my index finger on the ivory paper and slid it slowly, deliberately, back to her side of the table. "No," I said. Sophia blinked. Her perfectly contoured eyebrows drew together. She looked at the paper, then back at me. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Sophia. I am not paying for your imported peonies. I am not funding your vow renewal." "You have the money," she countered, her voice rising in pitch, drawing a brief glance from a nearby table. "You just got a promotion. Mom told me." "My finances are none of your concern," I said, keeping my tone flat and unyielding. "You and Julian want a celebrity event to project success. You can pay for it yourselves." "Isabella, this is your duty as my sister. Mom and Dad cannot help me. I am relying on you. Julian needs this to look good for his firm." If Julian cannot afford to buy flowers for his own wife, he should not be hosting a gala to impress his clients. Sophia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. The system had broken. The reliable, quiet younger sister had just refused a direct order. Her shock rapidly morphed into indignation. Her lips tightened into a thin, pale line. "You are doing this because of him," she hissed, leaning over the table. "You are hoarding your money for that grease monkey. You are choosing a mechanic over your own blood." I stood up from the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I left a $20 bill next to my untouched coffee, ensuring her overpriced mimosa was covered. "I am choosing my future, Sophia. Have a nice brunch." I walked away from the patio. I felt the heat of her glare on my back, but I did not turn around. For the first time in my life, I had closed the bank. I felt a strange, thrilling sense of liberation. But I knew the peace would not last. Entitlement does not surrender after one defeat. It regroups. It finds a new angle of attack. 2 weeks later, Liam took me hiking on a quiet, wooded trail overlooking the Farmington River. When we reached the summit, the autumn leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson around us, he did not offer a grand theatrical speech. He got down on one knee in the dirt, pulled a black velvet box from his jacket, and asked me to be his wife. It was honest, grounded, and real. Everything my family was not. I said yes, with tears in my eyes. When we got back to his truck, I took a picture of my hand resting on his steering wheel, the diamond catching the afternoon light. I sent the photo to the family group chat with a simple message. Liam and I are engaged. We are so happy. I did not expect a parade. I expected polite, strained congratulations. Instead, the chat remained silent for 45 minutes. Then, my phone buzzed. Sophia sent a message, not to the group, but directly to me. You could not even wait until my vow renewal was over, she wrote. You had to do this right now. You are doing everything in your power to steal my spotlight because you are bitter. Do not expect me to celebrate this selfish stunt. I read the text twice. She had taken one of the most important moments of my life and twisted it into an attack on her ego. She had framed my joy as a calculated weapon. I locked my phone and put it in my pocket. I did not reply. I knew exactly what was happening. By refusing to pay her invoice, I had declared independence. By getting engaged to the man they despised, I had proven that their judgment meant nothing to me. Sophia was furious, and she was not going to fight fair. She was going to run to our mother, spin a narrative of victimhood, and demand retaliation. I knew they would try to regain control. I just did not realize they would try to hijack the very celebration of my engagement to do it. Planning the engagement party should have been simple. Liam and I were aligned on our vision. We did not want ice sculptures or a string quartet. We wanted our closest friends, excellent food, and an atmosphere where people felt comfortable laughing loudly. We found the perfect location in Hartford. It was a high-end rustic brewery housed in a restored 19th century brick warehouse. The private back room featured vaulted ceilings, warm industrial lighting, and long oak tables. We secured the venue on a Tuesday. Liam paid the invoice in full that afternoon. I felt a sense of relief. It was done. It was ours. I made the mistake of believing I could share that detail at a family dinner without an intervention. We gathered at my parents' house that Friday. Liam was out of town surveying a fleet auction in upstate New York, so I attended alone. I sat at the formal dining table across from Sophia, who had maintained a frosty, wounded silence since I refused her floral invoice. My father was carving a roast. My mother poured the wine. I mentioned the brewery casually between courses, slipping the detail into a conversation about the upcoming weekend. I told them the date was set, the invitations were being finalized, and the food would be catered by a local artisan smokehouse. My mother set her wine glass down with a sharp click against the granite coaster. She looked at Richard, a silent, practiced exchange of parental authority. Isabella, Victoria began, her tone adopting that soothing, patronizing cadence she used when speaking to a confused child. We need to discuss this venue. A brewery is fine for a casual Friday night drink. It is entirely inappropriate for a Garcia family milestone. I put my fork down. We like the brewery, Mom. It fits us. It does not fit us, Richard interjected from the head of the table. He pointed the carving knife in my direction, a gesture of corporate command. You have an obligation to this family. When you host an event, it reflects on all of us. Julian has clients who might attend. Your mother has friends from the Historical Society. We cannot invite them to a glorified warehouse where people wear flannel shirts and drink from pint glasses. I felt the familiar tension rising in my chest. The iron door I had locked at the country club brunch was holding, but they were already trying to pry it open. There are no clients invited, I said, keeping my voice steady. This is an engagement party for Liam and me, not a networking event for Julian. Sophia let out a short, bitter laugh. God, you are so selfish. You are intentionally choosing a trashy location just to embarrass us. That is enough, Victoria said, holding up a manicured hand to silence my sister. She turned her attention back to me, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying sense of purpose. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and withdrew a folded trifold brochure. She smoothed it out on the table next to her plate. I took the liberty of solving this problem for you, Victoria announced. I stared at the brochure. It featured embossed gold lettering and a photo of a sweeping, manicured golf course. It was the Connecticut Heritage Club, the most exclusive, restrictive, and overpriced country club in the county. The same club where Sophia was currently attempting to fund her ridiculous vow renewal on my dime. I called the events coordinator this morning, Victoria continued, tapping her nail against the glossy paper. I placed a hold on the grand ballroom for the date you wanted. It is elegant, it is refined, it is the only way to make this union acceptable to our social circle. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. You booked a venue behind my back. I secured a location appropriate for our family, Richard corrected, cutting another slice of meat. You should be thanking your mother. She is saving you from a massive social blunder. Victoria smiled, a thin, tight expression of triumph. We can structure the seating chart to minimize exposure. We will place Liam's friends at the tables near the service doors in the back. The main floor will be reserved for our guests. You just need to call the club coordinator tomorrow and transfer the $4,000 deposit by Friday. I sat there in the dining room, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I looked at the three people sitting around the table. My blood. They had plotted this. They had discussed it behind closed doors, formulated a strategy, and executed it without a shred of respect for my autonomy. They did not want to celebrate my future. They wanted to hide my fiancé in the shadows of a country club ballroom while using my bank account to fund their social charade. I reached forward, picked up the glossy brochure, and handed it back to my mother. "No," I said. Victoria's smile vanished. "I beg your pardon. I am not paying a $4,000 deposit for a country club I do not want. Liam and I have already secured the brewery. The invoice is paid in full. The location is set." Richard dropped his carving knife. The heavy silver clattered against the serving platter.
"You will do as your mother arranged, Isabella. You are humiliating the Garcia name. I will not allow my daughter to host an event in some industrial garage just to appease a mechanic who does not know any better."
"Do not speak about him like that," I said, the calmness in my voice surprising even me. "He paid for a beautiful space. We are happy with it. You are welcome to attend, or you are welcome to stay home." The room went dead silent. The air grew thick, suffocating. I had drawn a boundary they could not cross, and they recognized the finality in my tone. My father leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The corporate mask slipped, revealing the cold, calculating enforcer underneath. "Let me make this perfectly clear," Richard said, his voice dropping an octave. "You will cancel that warehouse tomorrow. You will pay the deposit for the Heritage Club, and you will apologize to your mother for your insolence. If you choose to defy this family, if you choose to force us into a degrading environment to celebrate this mistake of a relationship, we will not be there." He leaned back, delivering the final blow. "None of us will attend. You will stand in that warehouse alone." It was a classic power play. The ultimate ultimatum. Comply and fund our image, or face total isolation. They believed they were the center of my universe. They believed the threat of their absence would terrify me into submission. They believed I would panic, pull out my credit card, and buy back their conditional affection. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother, whose chin was raised in defiance. I looked at Sophia, who wore a smug, victorious smirk, confident that I was about to break. I stood up from the table. I picked up my purse from the back of the chair. "I will make sure the caterer knows to expect 3 fewer plates," I said. Victoria gasped. Richard's face flushed a deep, furious red. "Isabella," Victoria warned, her voice trembling with genuine shock. "If you walk out that door, you are making a permanent mistake. We will not back down. You will be alone." I walked toward the foyer. I did not need their conditional love. I did not need to be a prop in their theatrical display of wealth. I chose the brewery. I chose the mechanic. I chose isolation over extortion. "Have a good night," I said. I opened the front door and walked out into the cool evening air. I drove home feeling a strange mix of sorrow and immense relief. The boundary was set. I had survived the worst they could throw at me. Or so I thought. I underestimated the depth of Sophia's vindictiveness. I believed the conflict was over the venue. I did not realize that while my parents were trying to extort my bank account, my golden sister was preparing a public execution. The real attack had not even begun. The afternoon following my departure from my parents' formal dining room felt unnervingly quiet. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black tea, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The iron boundary I had established the night before remained intact, but I knew my family despised a closed door. They preferred to kick it off the hinges. I just did not anticipate the specific weapon Sophia would choose to wield. My phone rested on the marble countertop. The screen lit up with a notification from the Garcia Extended Group Chat. To comprehend the sheer toxicity of this digital space, you must understand the roster. The thread contained 22 aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was not a place for sharing recipes or checking in on elderly relatives. It functioned as a continuous, scrolling scoreboard. Aunt Beatrice posted updates about her country club fees. Uncle David traded unsolicited stock advice. My cousin Marcus uploaded staged photos of his leased luxury SUVs. The chat was a curated exhibition of fragile egos. I kept the thread muted on a permanent basis. But on this particular Saturday afternoon, a direct notification pushed through my settings. Someone had tagged my name. I picked up the device. A high-resolution image file loaded onto the screen. Sophia had clearly spent her morning scavenging through the depths of local business social media pages to find the perfect ammunition. The photograph displayed Liam standing next to a massive yellow municipal excavator. He wore a heavy canvas work jacket. His face was smeared with dark motor oil and exhaust soot. A welding mask rested high on his forehead, pushing his dark hair back. Thick dust coated his denim jeans and the steel toes of his boots. He looked exhausted, gritty, and real. To a rational human being, the image represented a portrait of hard, honest labor. To my sister, it served as an instrument of execution. I read the text Sophia attached directly beneath the image. Isabella's future husband. Guess we will be wearing hazmat suits to the wedding. So embarrassing. A sharp, stinging heat spread across my collarbone. My pulse quickened, thudding against my ribs. I stared at the screen, watching the tiny typing indicator bubble pulse at the bottom of the thread. She was not finished. I counted the seconds. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes ticked by. She deliberately waited long enough for every aunt, uncle, and cousin to open the image, zoom in on the grease, and digest her mockery. Then Sophia sent her second message. OMG. So sorry. That was meant for Mom's private chat. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. It was a calculated strike, a flawless execution of plausible deniability. She wanted the entire bloodline to see the dirt on Liam's face. She wanted to publicly shame me into abandoning the brewery, or better yet, abandoning the man entirely. It was a digital ambush designed to break my resolve through the weight of collective peer pressure. The responses flooded the screen in rapid succession. The enablers smelled blood in the water. Aunt Beatrice, a woman who had not worked a single day since marrying a corporate lawyer in the late 80s, sent a crying face emoji. "Oh, Isabella," she typed, "love is blind, but you have a degree. You can do better." Cousin Marcus chimed in seconds later. "Rough break. Need Julian to review his retirement fund. Oh, wait. Mechanics just work until they drop. Right." More notifications chimed. Passive-aggressive concern masked as pity. Veiled insults wrapped in familial worry. They fed off each other, a pack of vultures tearing into a man they had never bothered to know. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not type out a furious, emotional paragraph defending my fiancé. I did not give them the satisfaction of witnessing my pain. I am a commercial underwriter. When I am presented with a liability, I do not panic. I document the damage. The heat in my chest receded, replaced by a cold, clinical detachment. I held down the side buttons on my device. Flash, screenshot. I scrolled down the thread. Flash, screenshot. I captured every single mocking comment, every fake apology, every laughing icon. I opened my secure cloud storage and created a new encrypted folder. I named it Family Audit. I dropped the image files inside, locking away the evidence of their cruelty. The sound of a key turning in the front door broke my concentration. Liam walked into the foyer, tossing his keys onto the entry table. He wore a clean flannel shirt and smelled like cedarwood and cold autumn air. He took one look at my rigid posture, the tight set of my jaw, and the glowing screen in my hand. He crossed the kitchen, leaning his tall, broad frame against the counter beside me. "What is going on?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I did not say a word. I simply unlocked my phone, opened the chat, and turned the screen toward him. I braced myself for his reaction. I waited for the hurt to flash in his eyes. I expected anger. I expected him to demand an explanation for why my family was treating him like a punchline. Instead, Liam studied the photograph. He looked at the harsh caption. He read the cruel comments from people he had shared a meal with just weeks prior. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He let out a low, gravelly laugh that vibrated deep in his chest. He reached out and tapped the screen, pointing directly at the image of himself covered in soot. "That was a rough Tuesday," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Blew a primary hydraulic line on that rig. Took my crew 6 hours to swap the valves and get the machine running again. Saved the city a small fortune in downtime." "They are mocking you, Liam," I whispered, the anger thick and heavy in my throat. "They are trying to humiliate us in front of everyone we know." He turned his gaze from the phone to my face. He reached out, his rough, calloused thumb tracing the line of my jaw, wiping away a physical tension I did not realize I was holding. "Let them talk, Izzy," he said softly. "Lions do not lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. They are judging a photograph because they do not have the spine to do the actual work. Do not let their noise ruin your day." His calm presence anchored me. The frantic, vicious noise of my family's digital echo chamber faded into nothingness against the solid reality of the man standing in front of me. He possessed a profound security in his own skin, a quiet confidence that Julian's expensive suits and my father's leased cars could never replicate. I looked back at the screen. The typing bubbles were still popping up, more relatives offering their passive pity, waiting for me to engage, waiting for me to defend myself and validate their attack. I tapped the text field. I did not justify Liam's profession. I did not explain his worth. I crafted a single, stoic response, stripping away all emotion. "The engagement party is Saturday at 7 p.m. at the brewery. All are welcome. Please leave the judgment at home." I hit send. The chat went dead. Not a single typing indicator appeared. No one sent a thumbs up icon. No one offered an excuse. The silence ringing from my phone was deafening. My message served as a mirror held up to their ugliness, and they hated the reflection. The public humiliation tactic failed to break my spirit, but it served a secondary, devastating purpose. It drew a firm, uncrossable line in the sand. By refusing to bow to their mockery, by refusing to cancel the venue and beg for their approval, I had finalized my father's ultimatum from the night before. They would not attend. I stood in my kitchen, holding Liam's hand, and I knew exactly what awaited us on Saturday night. I knew the caterers would set the long oak tables. I knew the string lights would cast a warm glow over the exposed brick walls. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that I was about to walk into a room filled with empty chairs. Saturday evening descended over Hartford with a sharp autumn chill. The restored 19th century brick warehouse stood near the edge of the river, its tall glass windows glowing with amber light. Inside the private back room of the brewery, the atmosphere was perfect. Iron rafters crossed the vaulted ceiling, and thick strands of vintage Edison bulbs cast a warm, inviting hue over the polished oak tables. The air carried the rich scent of roasted malt and hickory-smoked brisket. Liam and I arrived early to greet the guests. His crew started pouring through the heavy wooden doors at 6:45. These were the men and women my family had labeled a social embarrassment. They walked in wearing dark denim, heavy canvas jackets, and flannel shirts. They possessed thick beards, loud voices, and calloused hands. But more importantly, they brought a genuine, unfiltered warmth that I had never experienced in my parents' sterile marble foyer. A foreman named Mike wrapped me in a bear hug that nearly lifted me off the floor, handing me a wrapped bottle of rare, small-batch bourbon. His wife, a high school teacher named Sarah, kissed my cheek and told me the diamond on my finger caught the light from across the room. Over 30 people filled the left side of the venue. They ordered pints of dark stout, shared plates of artisan cheese, and filled the high-ceilinged room with deep, reverberating laughter. It was a vibrant, living celebration. But I kept my eyes fixed on the entrance. On the right side of the room, a long oak table sat waiting. It was set for 14 people. White ceramic plates gleamed under the amber lights. Polished silverware rested on folded linen napkins. Untouched crystal water goblets stood in a perfect, rigid line. I had personally handwritten the place cards the night before. Richard Garcia, Victoria Garcia, Sophia, Julian, Aunt Beatrice, Cousin Marcus. The clock above the bar ticked forward. 7:15. The caterers began bringing out the first round of appetizers, trays of smoked meats, blistered shishito peppers, and warm pretzels. The left side of the room cheered and dug in. The right side of the room remained a pristine, untouched ghost town. 7:30. I stood near the edge of the empty table, smoothing a wrinkle in the linen runner that did not exist. My chest felt tight. A cold, heavy knot formed beneath my ribs. I knew they had threatened to boycott. I knew my father delivered ultimatums expecting compliance. But a small, foolish part of my heart believed they would not actually go through with it. I believed that when faced with their daughter's engagement, blood would override vanity. I was wrong. 14 place cards stared back at me, anchoring 14 empty chairs, a physical manifestation of their rejection. At 7:45, I felt a sharp vibration in the pocket of my dress. I slipped my phone out and turned away from the crowd, shielding the screen. A new message alert glowed against the dark background. It was from my father. I opened the text. The message contained exactly 12 words. "We are at Sophia's house. We cannot support this mistake. Call us tomorrow." There was no apology for the absence. There was no polite excuse about traffic or illness. There was only a cold, calculated judgment delivered from the comfort of my sister's living room. They were sitting together, likely drinking Julian's overpriced wine, waiting for me to break down. They expected me to flee to the restroom in tears, ruin my own party, and call them begging for forgiveness. I stared at the glowing letters. I felt the final tether snap. I did not type a response. I pressed the power button on the side of the device, holding it down until the screen faded to black. I dropped the dead phone into my purse and snapped the clasp shut. I turned around and looked at the room. On the far side of the venue, Liam stood near the brick wall. He held a pint glass in one hand, listening intently to a story being told by a young apprentice mechanic. Liam threw his head back, his low, rumbling laugh cutting through the music playing over the speakers. He looked grounded, secure, and entirely happy. I looked at the 14 empty chairs one last time. The tight knot beneath my ribs dissolved. A wave of profound, startling clarity washed over me. I was not losing a family. I was escaping a hostage situation. I was walking away from a lifetime of endless audits, conditional affection, and financial extortion. The people sitting in Sophia's house did not love me. They loved my utility. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray, walked over to Liam, and slid my arm around his waist. He looked down, his dark eyes studying my face. He glanced over my shoulder toward the barren table, then looked back at me, a silent question passing between us. I smiled, raising my glass. "Let us celebrate," I said. And we did. It was the best night of my life. We danced on the scuffed concrete floor. We toasted with craft beer and ate hickory-smoked brisket until we could not breathe. I did not check my phone a single time. I existed entirely in the present, surrounded by people who did not require a country club membership to demonstrate their worth. Midnight arrived. The guests slowly filtered out, offering final hugs and warm congratulations. The catering staff began clearing the plates and wiping down the long tables. Liam and I sat alone at a small corner booth near the back windows. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the commercial refrigerators behind the bar. The ambient amber light caught the edges of his jaw. He looked tired, but deeply content. He reached into the interior pocket of his canvas jacket. "I have something for you," he said, his voice dropping to a soft rumble. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope and slid it across the reclaimed wood table. "What is this?" I asked, tracing the heavy cardstock. "For the insurance policy," he replied, taking a slow sip of his water. "You mentioned your firm requires an official appraisal to underwrite the rider for the ring. I had the jeweler draft the documentation." I opened the unsealed flap and pulled out the folded document. The paper bore the embossed letterhead of a highly exclusive private jeweler in Manhattan, the kind of jeweler that operates out of a vault on the upper floors of a high-rise, seeing clients by appointment only. My eyes scanned the itemized description. Custom platinum setting. Flawless, internally clear, 3-carat brilliant cut diamond. Then my gaze dropped to the valuation line. $42,000. I stopped breathing. I read the number again. Beside the valuation, a stamped seal indicated the payment status. Paid in full via cashier's check. My fiancé, the man my father told to take night classes at a community college, had purchased a $42,000 diamond in cash. I looked up at him, my mind spinning, trying to reconcile the figure on the page with the faded 1998 Ford truck parked outside. Liam just watched me, an easy, quiet calm radiating from his posture. My eyes darted back to the heavy paper, moving to the top left corner where the client billing information was printed in sharp, crisp ink. Liam Bennett, Chief Executive Officer, Bennett Heavy Fleet Solutions. I traced the letters with my index finger. CEO. "You own it," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical force. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He did not boast. He did not swagger. "I started as an apprentice when I was 19, he said. "Bought out the original owner 7 years ago when he retired. We run 5 commercial garages now. We service the municipal transit grids for 3 counties." My mind flashed back to the Sunday dinner. I remembered Julian sitting in his bespoke suit, offering condescending advice about hourly wages. I remembered Sophia mocking the soot on Liam's face. They had treated him like dirt. They had boycotted our celebration because they believed he was beneath them. The beat-up truck was a deliberate choice. The scuffed work boots were a preference. He was not just a mechanic. He was a self-made millionaire holding infrastructure contracts worth more than my parents' entire neighborhood. "Why did you not tell them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Liam reached across the table, his warm, rough hand covering mine. "When I met your family, I saw how they looked at my boots," he said softly. "I saw how they measured a man by his zip code instead of his character. I decided to let them see whatever they wanted to see. It is the best way to find out who people really are." He had handed them a shovel, and they had eagerly dug their own graves. We left the brewery and drove home through the quiet, darkened streets of Hartford. I sat in the passenger seat of his old Ford, staring at the appraisal document resting on my lap. The secret was out between us, binding us closer together, but my family had no idea. They went to sleep in their leased cars and heavily mortgaged homes, confident in their superiority, convinced they had punished me for choosing a laborer. I knew my silence from the party would infuriate them. My mother would not tolerate being ignored. Her pride required my submission. I knew she would not wait long to demand an explanation. I just did not expect her to march up my driveway a mere 9 hours later, pounding on my front door, ready to walk directly into the most devastating trap she had ever set for herself. Which brings us back to the harsh light of Sunday morning. I stood in my kitchen, a steaming mug of black tea in my hand, listening to the silence of my own house. Liam had left 20 minutes prior to pick up fresh bagels from a bakery downtown. The quiet was profound. a stark contrast to the lively, roaring celebration that had filled the brewery the night before. Then came the sound of 3 sharp, rapid knocks against my front door. I did not flinch. I walked down the hallway, my bare feet quiet against the hardwood floor. I knew who was standing on the other side of the wood. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My mother stood on the porch. She wore a tailored camel hair coat and oversized dark sunglasses, looking every bit the aggrieved matriarch. She carried the scent of expensive floral perfume and crisp autumn air. She did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me, her leather heels striking the floorboards with rigid, practiced authority. She headed straight for the kitchen, expecting to find a daughter wrecked by sorrow. She expected red eyes, a trembling voice, and a desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, she found a clean kitchen, a calm daughter, and a black velvet box sitting on the granite island. She stopped in front of the counter. She pulled off her sunglasses, folding the arms with a sharp snap. She glared at the velvet box, her upper lip curling into a sneer of pure disdain. "If you are going to humiliate us by marrying a mechanic," Victoria said, her voice tight and clipped, "I at least want to see the cheap metal he bought on credit." The arrogance in her tone was breathtaking. Less than 12 hours ago, she had orchestrated a boycott of my engagement party. She had commanded 14 family members to leave their chairs empty. Now, she stood in my home, demanding to inspect a symbol of a relationship she had just tried to destroy. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of defense. I walked over to the safe, hidden inside the hallway coat closet. I entered the keypad combination, swung the heavy steel door open, and retrieved the thick, cream-colored envelope Liam had given me the night before. I carried it back into the kitchen. I placed the heavy cardstock directly onto the granite counter, right next to her manicured hand. Victoria eyed the paper with suspicion, as if it might catch fire. Then she snatched it up. I leaned against the opposite counter, crossed my arms, and watched the audit unfold in real time. I watched her eyes scan the elegant, embossed letterhead of the Manhattan jeweler. I saw her gaze travel down the itemized description. Custom platinum setting. Brilliant cut. Internally clear. Her eyes hit the valuation line. $42,000. Paid in full. Cashier's check. A sharp, jagged breath caught in her throat. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen. Her eyes darted upward, searching for the billing information, desperate to find a mistake. She needed the document to be a fake. She needed the narrative she had constructed to remain intact. Her gaze locked onto the bold ink at the top left corner of the page. Liam Bennett, Chief Executive Officer, Bennett Heavy Fleet Solutions. The physical transformation was immediate and severe. The blood drained from her neck and face, leaving her skin an ashen, sickly pale. The rigid, indignant posture she had carried through the front door vanished. Her knees buckled just a fraction of an inch. She reached out, gripping the edge of the granite island to steady herself before sinking slowly onto the nearest bar stool. She stared at the paper. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "He owns the shop," she whispered, the sentence barely carrying over the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at the woman who had sneered at my fiancé over a roast beef dinner. I looked at the woman who had booked a country club behind my back to hide his friends in the shadows. "He owns the largest commercial fleet repair enterprise in the tri-state area." "Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm and level. "He holds the municipal infrastructure contracts for 3 different counties. He employs over 70 mechanics." She did not blink. Her eyes remained glued to the word CEO. "He wears boots because he likes the work," I continued, stepping closer to the island. "He drives that old truck because it belonged to his father. He is not a charity case. He is a self-made man. And he possesses more wealth than Julian, Richard, and every single person sitting in that country club combined." The silence that followed was suffocating. As an underwriter, I observe how people react when their liabilities are suddenly exposed. Most people panic. Some people cry. Some offer immediate, groveling apologies to mitigate the damage. My mother did none of those things. She did not look at me and express regret for the empty chairs at the brewery. She did not apologize for Sophia posting that cruel photograph in the family group chat. She did not show a single ounce of remorse for the pain she had tried to inflict upon me just one night prior. Instead, I watched the gears in her mind shift direction. The shock fading from her eyes was quickly replaced by something far more sinister. I saw the exact second the math clicked into place. I saw her tallying the valuation of a $42,000 ring against the potential revenue of a massive commercial enterprise. I saw her recalculating Liam's worth, moving him from the liability column straight into the asset column. The disgust on her face smoothed out, melting away until nothing remained but sheer, unadulterated greed. Her hands, which had been trembling slightly against the heavy cardstock, grew still. She placed the appraisal gently back onto the counter, treating the paper with a sudden, profound reverence. She looked up at me. The cold, judgmental matriarch was gone. In her place sat a woman calculating how to extract capital from a newly discovered gold mine. "Well," Victoria said, her voice dropping into a soft, honeyed tone I had not heard since childhood. "This is certainly unexpected." I stared at her, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. The lack of an apology was loud. The immediate pivot was deafening. "Liam is a very private person," she continued, smoothing the lapels of her camel hair coat. "He should have been more forthcoming about his position. We simply misunderstood his background. We only want what is best for you, Isabella. You know that." The revisionist history began right there in my kitchen. She was already rewriting the narrative. The boycott was no longer an act of cruel extortion. It was just a simple misunderstanding. The insults were no longer classist attacks. They were just the natural concerns of protective parents. She stood up from the bar stool, her composure entirely restored. "I must get back to your father," she said, offering a tight, bright smile that did not reach her eyes. "We have a lot to discuss. Please tell Liam we send our warmest regards." She turned and walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking a much lighter, faster rhythm across the floorboards. I listened to the front door open and close. I stood alone in the kitchen, looking at the velvet box and the cream-colored paper. I knew my family was shallow. I knew they valued status above all else. But seeing how quickly my mother abandoned her supposed moral outrage the moment she smelled money was chilling. The truth had not shamed them into leaving us alone. The truth had just painted a giant target on Liam's back. I knew the silence from my family would end. The disdain would evaporate. The entire dynamic was about to flip, bringing a wave of fake affection and calculated flattery. They were going to come for him. And they were going to start with an invitation we could not refuse. The transformation occurred with terrifying speed. Within 48 hours of my mother discovering the appraisal document on my kitchen counter, the family boycott was entirely erased from their collective memory. They did not acknowledge the empty chairs. They did not mention the cruel group chat. They operated under the assumption that if they simply pretended the hostility never happened, I would play along and accept their new reality. As a commercial underwriter, I am trained to look for behavioral anomalies. When a client with a history of late payments suddenly attempts to overinsure a failing property, bells ring, red flags deploy. You know a fraudulent claim is being prepared. My family was preparing a claim. The campaign began on Monday morning. My phone buzzed on my desk at the insurance firm. It was a text from Victoria. "Good morning, sweetheart," the message read. "Hoping you and our wonderful future son-in-law have a beautiful week. Let us catch up soon." I stared at the screen, a cold nausea settling in my stomach. My mother never used terms of endearment over text. She never used exclamation points, and she certainly never referred to anyone outside her immediate social circle as wonderful. 2 days prior, Liam was a grease monkey who was going to ruin my life. Today, he was a cherished addition to the bloodline. I did not reply. On Tuesday afternoon, the campaign escalated from digital flattery to physical tribute. Liam came home from the garage around 6 o'clock. He walked through the front door carrying a sleek, heavy wooden box bearing the logo of an imported, high-end Scottish distillery. He set the wooden crate on the entryway table and unlatched the brass hinge. Inside rested a bottle of aged single malt scotch. The retail price of that specific vintage hovered right around $500. A small, cream-colored envelope was tucked beside the glass neck. Liam pulled the card out and handed it to me. The handwriting belonged to my father. To Liam, the note read, "Welcome to the family. Looking forward to many profitable conversations. Best, Richard." I looked from the card to the amber liquid inside the expensive bottle. To understand the gravity of this gift, you have to understand how Richard Garcia operated. My father was a man who strictly categorized the world into superiors and subordinates. He gifted cheap, generic wine to his subordinates. He only purchased premium liquor for men he needed to impress. For regional directors, board members, and executives who held the power to elevate his status. By sending a $500 bottle of scotch to the loading dock of a commercial garage, Richard was waving a white flag. He was officially acknowledging Liam as a superior. He was bowing to the CEO title he had discovered via my mother. The delivery driver looked terrified, Liam said, a wry smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Walked right past 3 bays of heavy machinery in a tailored suit, trying not to get oil on his shoes, just to hand this to me while I was inspecting a transmission. "It is a bribe," I said, dropping the card onto the table. "It is a down payment," Liam corrected, closing the wooden box. "Your father is investing in future access." By Wednesday, the third prong of their offensive deployed. This one came from Sophia. My sister treated her social media presence like a highly curated art gallery. She only interacted with accounts that elevated her perceived status. For years, she had virtually ignored my existence online. Suddenly, my notifications began to light up in rapid succession. Sophia was scrolling through my history, leaving a digital trail of affection. She liked a photo of Liam and me hiking from 3 months ago. She liked a picture of our dog. She even went back a full year to leave a string of heart icons on a mundane post about a weekend road trip. It was a systematic whitewashing. She was actively trying to bury the memory of the hazmat suit comment she had posted in the family group chat. She wanted the public record to show that she was a supportive, loving sister. It was not an apology. It was a calculated recalculation. They had audited Liam's worth and realized he was not a liability. He was a bank. And my family always wanted to be on good terms with the bank. I watched the love bombing unfold over the course of 7 days, maintaining my silence. I did not return the texts. I did not like the comments. I knew they were building toward a specific request, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of an easy opening. The real setup arrived exactly 1 week after the empty chairs at the brewery. I was cooking dinner on a Friday evening when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and pressed accept. "Isabella, honey," Victoria chirped. Her voice dripped with an artificial sugary sweetness that made my teeth ache. "I am so glad I caught you." "Hello, Mom." "Listen," her tone shifted, adopting a practiced, sorrowful cadence. "We feel just terrible about missing the party last weekend. It was a tragedy. Julian came down with a sudden, blinding migraine right as we were getting dressed. You know how those affect him. He could barely stand. We had to stay at Sophia's house to help him manage the pain. We were devastated to miss your special night." I closed my eyes. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. 7 days ago, my father had texted me the truth. "We cannot support this mistake." There was no migraine. There was no sudden illness. There was only a deliberate, coordinated boycott designed to break my spirit. Now she was rewriting history, confident that I would accept the fiction just to keep the peace. "I am sorry Julian was unwell," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Well, he is fully recovered now," she pivoted smoothly, the fake sorrow vanishing. "And we want to make it up to you and Liam. We insist on hosting a proper celebration. Dinner this Friday at the Capitol Grill. Our treat. The Capitol Grill. Mahogany-paneled walls, dry-aged steaks, and waiters in white coats. It was the exact type of establishment my family used to project wealth. I appreciate the offer, Mom, but Liam is very busy with the business. Oh, I know he is, Victoria said, a subtle edge of urgency creeping into her bright tone. But he must eat. And Julian has something very exciting to discuss with him. A wonderful opportunity. Please, Isabella, let us celebrate our growing family. I stared at the kitchen wall. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a combination lock. The texts, the scotch, the social media likes, the fake migraine, the expensive steakhouse invitation. Julian had something exciting to discuss. In the Garcia family, a free dinner was never free. It was an invoice waiting to be presented. They had discovered Liam possessed capital, and Julian, the supposed wealth manager, was ready to make a pitch. I will ask him, I said. I will let you know tomorrow. I ended the call without waiting for a goodbye. When Liam walked into the kitchen 10 minutes later, I was still standing by the stove, turning the conversation over in my mind. He walked up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist, resting his chin on the top of my head. "You are thinking too loud," he murmured. "What happened?" "My mother called," I said, leaning back into his solid frame. "The boycott was officially due to a sudden migraine. They want to take us to the Capitol Grill on Friday to make up for missing the party." Liam chuckled, a low vibration against my back. "Fancy place. What is the catch?" "Julian has an exciting opportunity to discuss with you," I quoted, turning around to face him. I looked up into his dark eyes. "Liam, they know about the company. They looked up the valuation. They know you have money, and they are going to ask for it. This dinner is an ambush. Julian is going to pitch you some kind of investment." I expected Liam to roll his eyes. I expected him to tell me to decline the invitation and cut them off entirely. Instead, a slow, predatory calm settled over his features. The easygoing mechanic vanished, replaced entirely by the ruthless, self-made executive who had built an empire from the ground up. He reached down, adjusting the heavy laces of his scuffed leather work boots. He pulled the leather tight, securing the knot with practiced efficiency. He stood back up, meeting my worried gaze with a look of absolute, unshakable confidence. "Tell them we will be there at 7, Liam said. "Let us see the pitch." We arrived at the Capitol Grill 10 minutes before 7. The restaurant projected an aura of old money, dark mahogany-paneled walls, brass fixtures, and the rich scent of dry-aged beef resting in the air. The host led us to a private alcove in the back. My family was already seated. They looked as if they were attending a high society gala rather than a Friday night dinner. Victoria wore a jewel-toned silk blouse. Richard sported a sharp navy blazer. Sophia dripped in designer labels, her wrists heavy with gold bracelets. Julian sat at the head of the table in a bespoke charcoal suit, his luxury watch catching the dim overhead lighting. Liam walked beside me. He wore a tailored dark jacket and a crisp white shirt, but he did not leave his identity at the door. He still wore his work boots. When we reached the table, the performance began. Victoria stood up. She did not offer a stiff nod. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Liam in a brief, theatrical hug. Richard stood next, extending his right hand. He grasped Liam's hand firmly, pumping it twice. His eyes did not drop to Liam's cuticles this time. He looked Liam directly in the eye, offering a practiced smile. "Please sit," Richard directed, gesturing to the open leather chairs across from Julian. Before we even opened our menus, the sommelier arrived. He carried a bottle of imported Bordeaux, the label yellowed with age. Richard had ordered it in advance. The waiter uncorked the bottle, poured a tasting measure for my father, and filled our crystal glasses. "To new beginnings," Richard announced, raising his glass. "To family." The glasses chimed together. The sound was hollow. The first course arrived, lobster bisque and seared scallops. The conversation flowed, but it felt heavily scripted. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the white tablecloth. He looked at Liam with an expression of profound, manufactured respect. "Isabella mentioned you handle municipal transit grids," Richard said, swirling his dark wine. "Those are impressive infrastructure contracts, Liam. Managing a fleet of that size requires serious logistical talent. How do you handle the overhead on 70 vehicles?" It was a staggering pivot. A month ago, Richard had dismissed Liam as a laborer. Now he was interviewing him like a featured guest on a financial podcast. Liam did not gloat. He did not take the bait to brag. He cut a scallop, took a bite, and gave a brief, measured answer about preventive maintenance scheduling and bulk parts purchasing. He gave them nothing to use, remaining polite but guarded. The tension at the table thickened under the guise of civility. My mother complimented my dress. Sophia asked about wedding planning with a tight, strange smile. Every word felt like a chess move, positioning the pieces for the inevitable strike. Then the entrees arrived. Thick cuts of filet mignon, roasted asparagus, and truffle potatoes covered the table. The waiter cleared the empty soup bowls and vanished into the bustling dining room. The trap was set. Julian cleared his throat. He reached forward and unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket. It was a calculated physical gesture designed to signal a shift from casual dining to serious business. He leaned toward Liam, folding his hands together on the table. "Liam," Julian began, his voice dropping into a smooth, confidential register, "I have been thinking a lot about your operation. You have built an incredible foundation. But cash sitting in equipment is dormant capital. You need liquid assets working for you." Liam set his fork down. He looked at Julian, his dark eyes unreadable. "Is that right?" Julian nodded, a slick smile stretching across his face. "As family, I want to offer you a ground floor opportunity, something I usually reserve for my top-tier institutional clients." My underwriter instincts flared. Julian was a retail wealth manager, not an investment banker. He did not have institutional clients. He was lying. "I am spinning off my firm," Julian continued, leaning even closer. "I am launching an independent boutique brokerage. I have the client roster ready to migrate. I just need one silent partner to finalize the initial capitalization phase. It is a clean buy-in, $800,000. The number hung in the air over the expensive stakes. $800,000. Delivered as a casual request, as if he were asking Liam to split the dinner check. I watched Julian's face. He tried to project supreme confidence, but his eyes betrayed him. His pupils were dilated, a tiny muscle feathered near his jawline. He was desperate. "In exchange for the initial seed capital," Julian said, speaking faster now, "you get a guaranteed 20% return year over year, paid out quarterly. It is easy money for a guy in your position. You write the check, sit back, and watch your portfolio double in half a decade." I stared at Julian in stunned silence. A guaranteed 20% return does not exist in legitimate finance. It is the hallmark of a Ponzi scheme, or a desperate man trying to secure a bailout he has no intention of repaying. He was trying to con my fiancé right in front of me. I opened my mouth to shut the conversation down, but Liam shifted his weight in the leather chair, drawing my attention. Liam did not look angry. He did not look insulted. He picked up his steak knife and his heavy silver fork. He sliced a piece of filet mignon with surgical precision. He placed the meat in his mouth, chewed slowly, and swallowed. He took a sip of his water. He let Julian sit in the agonizing silence for 10 seconds. "I appreciate the offer, Julian," Liam finally said. His voice was a low, steady rumble. Julian exhaled a breath he had been holding. "Great. I can have my legal team draw up the paperwork by Monday. But my capital is tied up in equipment," Liam finished, ignoring Julian's interruption. "I do not invest outside my industry." Julian's slick smile faltered. The corners of his mouth twitched downward. The confident wealth manager routine cracked, revealing the panicked salesman underneath. "Come on, man," Julian urged, his voice losing its smooth polish. "This is a sure thing. You are leaving money on the table. Family helps family. This is how we build a dynasty together. Liam looked directly into Julianne's eyes. He did not blink. He did not offer an excuse. He did not soften the blow with an apology. No, Liam said. Just one word, 2 letters, delivered with the finality of a falling guillotine. The temperature at the table plummeted. The illusion of a happy family gathering shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The silence was deafening, broken only by the clinking of silverware from the surrounding booths. Julian's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He stared at Liam, his jaw working silently, unable to process the blunt rejection. Richard looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his asparagus. Victoria took a long, rigid sip of her wine. Sophia, however, could not contain her rage. She turned her venomous glare toward me. Her eyes were bright with fury, her manicured nails digging into the white tablecloth. "Say something to him, Isabella," Sophia hissed, leaning across the table. "Julian is handing you both a golden ticket. You are going to let him pass this up just because he is too stubborn to understand high-level finance? Talk some sense into him." I met my sister's furious gaze. I saw the entitlement radiating from her pores. She truly believed her husband had a right to Liam's hard-earned money. She believed I was obligated to facilitate the extraction. I placed my linen napkin on the table. I kept my posture straight and my voice icy. "Liam's finances are his own," I said. "He gave Julian his answer. We are not discussing this again." Sophia's mouth fell open. She looked from me to Liam, then to our parents, waiting for someone to overrule my boundary. No one spoke. Richard and Victoria remained silent, unwilling to risk further alienating the deepest pockets at the table. The rest of the meal was consumed in a freezing, hostile silence. No one ordered dessert. No one asked for coffee. When the leather-bound check presenter arrived, Richard paid the bill with a tight, strained smile. We walked out of the Capitol Grill and stood on the sidewalk under the amber glow of the streetlights. We exchanged stiff, formal goodbyes. There were no hugs. There were no promises to catch up soon. Liam and I walked toward his truck. I glanced over my shoulder one last time. Sophia was standing near the valet stand, glaring at our retreating backs. Her hands were curled into tight fists. Her posture was rigid with unspent rage. My family had tried to exploit Liam, and he had shut them down effortlessly. But I knew my sister. I knew her ego could not handle the humiliation of that single word. She was not going to walk away and lick her wounds. If she could not have his money, she was going to punish him for keeping it. Her entitlement was rapidly mutating into vindictiveness, and she was about to launch a retaliation that would force me to use every tool in my professional arsenal to destroy her. The silence following the ambush dinner lasted exactly 3 days. I went to work, Liam went to the garages. We did not speak about Julian's desperate pitch or Sophia's furious glare on the sidewalk outside the Capitol Grill. We existed in a tense, suspended state of waiting, knowing my sister's ego required a response to the humiliation she had endured. Sophia had always operated under a very specific psychological framework. She believed she was inherently deserving of the best the world had to offer. When reality failed to meet her expectations, she did not adapt. She sought vengeance. Since childhood, if she could not control a situation, she set out to destroy it. If a classmate won a lead role in the school play, Sophia spread a rumor about them. If a coworker received a promotion she wanted, she anonymously reported them to human resources. Her entitlement had mutated into pure vindictiveness. Liam had denied her husband $800,000. He had denied her the capital required to fund her extravagant lifestyle. Therefore, Liam had to be punished. I just did not expect her retaliation to be so reckless. On Tuesday evening, Liam walked through the front door of our house. He did not greet me with his usual smile. His jaw was set tight. His dark eyes held a cold, hard focus. He walked into the kitchen, his heavy boots sounding loud against the hardwood floor, and placed a single piece of printer paper on the granite island. "Read this," he said, his voice a low rumble. I picked up the paper. It was a printed email thread. I scanned the header information. The original email was sent to the general inbox of the Hartford Department of Public Works, the municipal agency that managed the city's infrastructure contracts. The sender's name was listed as Concerned Citizen. The email address was a generic, anonymous account created on a free server. I read the body of the message. To the Director of Public Works, I am writing to report severe misconduct by one of your primary contractors, Liam Bennett of Bennett Heavy Fleet Solutions. Over the weekend, I observed Mr. Bennett acting in a highly unprofessional manner at a local establishment. He was heavily intoxicated, verbally abusive to staff, and making aggressive, inappropriate advances towards several female patrons. As a taxpayer, I find it unacceptable that municipal funds are being awarded to an individual who demonstrates such flagrant disregard for basic decency and public safety. A man of this character should not hold government contracts. I strongly urge the city to immediately review and revoke all active agreements with Bennett Heavy Fleet Solutions before his behavior becomes a public liability for the department. A Concerned Citizen. My breath caught in my throat. I read the words a second time, the letters blurring together as the sheer audacity of the lie settled into my brain. Sophia had not just sent a nasty text message. She had bypassed Liam's company entirely and targeted the very source of his largest revenue streams. She had accused him of public intoxication and harassment in a formal complaint to a government entity. It was a calculated attempt to sever his municipal contracts. It was not just petty revenge. It was character assassination. It was documented, actionable defamation. My hands began to shake. I looked up at Liam. "How did you get this?" I asked, my voice tight with rising anger. "Look at the top of the thread," he replied, crossing his arms over his chest. I looked back at the paper. Above Sophia's anonymous attack, there was a forwarded message from the Director of Public Works. It was addressed directly to Liam's corporate inbox. "Liam," the director wrote, "see the attached complaint received this morning. Looks like someone has a grudge. We do not investigate anonymous third-party vendor complaints internally unless there is a police report attached. Forwarding this to you so you can handle the spam on your end. See you at the fleet review on Thursday. Best, Mark." Sophia had fundamentally misunderstood how municipal bureaucracies function. She believed her email would trigger a massive, secret internal investigation, resulting in Liam losing his contracts. She did not realize that city officials deal with crank complaints constantly. They do not waste taxpayer resources investigating anonymous emails about their most reliable vendors. They forward the garbage directly to the CEO and tell them to handle it. She had fired a missile directly into Liam's own inbox. "She is out of her mind," I whispered, setting the paper back onto the granite counter. "This is Sophia. I know the phrasing. It has to be her." "I know it is her," Liam said, his voice devoid of any humor. It was sent at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. I pulled the IP address from the email header. It maps back to the residential internet provider servicing her specific neighborhood. She did not even bother to use a virtual private network to hide her location. She just set up a fake email and hit send from her living room couch. He leaned against the counter, his dark eyes locked onto mine. "She tried to torch my livelihood, Isabella. She tried to cost my employees their jobs because Julian did not get his handout." I felt a cold sweat rake out across the back of my neck. My sister had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She had moved from passive-aggressive insults to active sabotage. "What do you want to do?" Liam asked. His tone was deferential, but the iron beneath his words was clear. He was giving me the choice on how to proceed, but he would not let this stand unanswered. I looked at the printed email. I looked at the vicious lies she had constructed to destroy the man I loved. The anger in my chest coalesced into a sharp, crystalline focus. "Nothing yet," I said. Liam raised an eyebrow. "You want to let this go?" "I do not want to let it go. I want to end it." I picked up the paper, walked over to my home office desk in the corner of the living room, and pulled a thick manila folder from the bottom drawer. I slid the printed email inside and closed the cover. "People only panic like this when the ship is sinking," I said, turning back to Liam. "Sophia is vindictive, but she is also lazy. She would not risk criminal defamation just because she is annoyed. She did this because she is desperate. Julian is desperate." I sat down in my desk chair and opened my laptop. "Julian asked you for $800,000 on a Friday night," I continued, my fingers resting on the keyboard. "When you said no, Sophia tried to destroy your primary revenue stream on Tuesday morning. That is not the behavior of a wealth manager spinning off a new firm. That is the behavior of a man who is about to hit a brick wall at 100 miles an hour." My professional instincts, honed over years of assessing corporate risk and spotting fraudulent claims, took full control. I was no longer the quiet younger sister. I was a commercial underwriter, and my family was a liability file that needed to be audited. "I need to know why he needs that exact number," I said, my eyes tracking the glow of the screen. "I need to know what he is hiding." Liam watched me for a long moment. He saw the cold resolve settling over my features. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in my posture. "Find it," he said. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me to my work. I spent the next 4 hours immersed in the digital architecture of public records. As a licensed underwriter, I possess access credentials to databases the general public does not know exist. I can pull property liens, civil litigation dockets, and corporate shell company registrations. I can track the flow of capital from a primary residence down to a secondary LLC. I started with Richard and Victoria. I searched their primary address in the county tax portal. The results loaded instantly, painting a bleak picture of the facade they presented at the Capitol Grill. I moved on to Julian and Sophia. I pulled the registration for Julian's wealth management firm. I cross-referenced his name with the State Financial Regulatory Board. I searched the civil court dockets for his home county. The deeper I dug, the darker the picture became. The files loaded onto my screen one by one, stripping away the bespoke suits, the country club memberships, and the leased luxury cars. The truth was written in stark black and white text, hidden beneath layers of legal jargon and overdue notices. By 2 a.m, my eyes burned from the blue light of the monitor. But I had found it. I had found the rot hiding in the foundation of the Garcia family. I had found the reason Julian needed Liam's money, and it was far worse than a failing business. They had mocked Liam's boots while standing on a trapdoor they had built themselves, and the lever was about to be pulled. My profession requires a cynical eye. As a commercial insurance underwriter, I do not trust firm handshakes. I do not trust tailored suits, and I certainly do not trust casual pitches over expensive stakes. I trust data. People will lie to your face without a second thought, but their financial footprints always tell the truth. I possess access credentials to informational databases the general public does not even know exist. I can pull municipal property liens, unearth sealed civil litigation dockets, and trace the flow of hidden capital through layers of corporate shell companies. It is my job to evaluate risk by stripping away the polished exterior to find the rot hiding underneath. I sat alone in the dim light of my home office, the blue glow of the laptop screen illuminating the dark room. The house was dead quiet. Liam was asleep down the hallway, trusting me to handle the threat my sister had launched against him. I opened my encrypted portal and began to pull the threads of my family's pristine facade. I started with my parents. I typed Richard and Victoria Garcia into the county tax assessment database. I wanted to see the financial foundation of the people who believed a brewery was beneath their dignity. The portal took 3 seconds to load the history of their 5-bedroom colonial home in the upscale suburbs. The screen populated with a cascade of red text. My parents were 90 days past due on their primary mortgage. A formal notice of default had been filed by their lender just 2 weeks before our engagement party. But the delinquency was not the most damning piece of evidence. I scrolled down to the property deed history and found a secondary loan. My father had taken out a high-interest second mortgage on the house 9 months ago. I checked the dates. 9 months ago was the exact same week Richard had renewed the lease on his slate gray Mercedes. I leaned back in my desk chair, the leather creaking softly in the silent room. My father had literally traded the equity of his family home for a hood ornament. He was financing a luxury vehicle with borrowed money while his mortgage slipped into default. Victoria was attending country club luncheons and demanding I book a $4,000 ballroom while her own kitchen was inches away from bank foreclosure. They had looked at Liam, a man who owned his home and his business outright, and told him he needed night classes to be worthy of their presence. They had sneered at his scuffed boots while they were drowning in an ocean of red ink. The hypocrisy tasted metallic in the back of my throat. But the financial ruin of my parents was just the beginning. I closed the county property portal and opened the state financial regulatory database. I typed Julian's full legal name into the search bar. Julian had spent years cultivating the persona of a high-level wealth manager. He wore the Rolex, he booked the private tables at the Capitol Grill, and he spoke down to anyone who earned an hourly wage. The regulatory database loaded. His official broker profile appeared on the screen. Under the section labeled Current License Status, a single word was stamped in bold red letters: suspended. Julian was not an active wealth manager. He was not legally permitted to trade a single share of stock. I clicked on the Disciplinary Actions tab, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. The list of infractions stretched down the page: fiduciary negligence, breach of duty, mishandling of retail client funds. The state board had stripped his credentials pending a formal hearing. Julian was not spinning off a new boutique brokerage firm. He was unemployed and disgraced. I needed to know the full extent of his exposure. I switched from the regulatory board to the state civil court dockets. I entered Julian as a defendant. 3 active lawsuits populated the screen. Former clients were suing him for gross negligence. They alleged he had taken their retirement savings and placed them into unauthorized, highly leveraged, high-risk trading vehicles, resulting in total catastrophic losses. The plaintiffs were demanding full restitution. I clicked on the most recent docket file, a case scheduled for emergency arbitration. I read through the legal filings, scanning the dense paragraphs of lawyer jargon, until I found the proposed settlement agreement. The plaintiffs had offered a confidential resolution. If Julian paid the settlement sum within 30 days, they would drop the civil suits and decline to forward the evidence to the district attorney for criminal fraud prosecution. I scrolled down to the required settlement figure: $800,000. I stared at the glowing numbers, the exact amount Julian had casually requested from Liam over a plate of filet mignon. It was not a ground floor opportunity. It was not seed capital for a new enterprise. It was a desperate, secret bailout designed to keep Julian out of a federal penitentiary. The puzzle pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. Sophia throwing a lavish vow renewal to project success while Julian's career burned to the ground. My parents suddenly fawning over Liam the moment they realized he was a millionaire. The fake migraine to excuse their boycott, followed immediately by an ambush dinner to extract capital. They needed the grease monkey. They needed the laborer they had mocked to save them from prison and homelessness. They had orchestrated the entire Capitol Grill dinner to trick Liam into paying Julian's extortionate legal bills. And when Liam had looked Julian in the eye and said no, their panic had boiled over. That rejection was the catalyst for Sophia's reckless email to the Department of Public Works. She was terrified. She was lashing out because her husband was facing criminal indictment, her sister had refused to pay her floral invoices, and her primary target had kept his wallet firmly closed. A cold, dark satisfaction settled over me. I had the truth. I had the documentation. I could print these files, hand them to Liam, and we could walk away forever, leaving my family to collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. But a good underwriter never stops at the surface layer of a fraud case. You have to find where the missing money actually went. Julian had lost millions of his clients' dollars in unauthorized trades. I needed to know what he bought. I needed to know the specific financial instrument that had destroyed his career. I returned to the civil court documents. I scoured the exhibits until I found the name of the primary trading entity Julian had used to execute the disastrous market maneuvers. It was an anonymous shell company, a limited liability corporation registered to his home address. I opened my federal corporate tracking software. I entered the LLC name and requested the archived trading logs from the previous fiscal year. The system took a full minute to decrypt and compile the data. I rubbed my tired eyes, waiting for the progress bar to reach 100%. The house was so quiet, I could hear the wind rustling the autumn leaves against the window pane. The screen flashed. The trading logs appeared. I scrolled through the columns of data, tracking the dates, the volume of capital moved, and the specific market sectors Julian had targeted. My breath caught in my throat. The cold satisfaction that had been keeping me grounded evaporated in an instant, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. My blood ran hot, a burning wave of adrenaline rushing through my veins. Julian had not just made a bad bet on a random technology stock. He had not just mismanaged funds in a volatile, emerging market. I looked at the specific financial instruments listed on the screen. I looked at the dates of the trades. He had deliberately targeted a very specific, highly localized sector, and he had done it with the explicit intention of profiting from its failure. I grabbed my pen and circled the data on my notepad, the ink carving deep grooves into the paper. I knew exactly what my family was going to do next. I knew they would try one final, desperate maneuver to get their hands on Liam's assets before the clock ran out on Julian's settlement. And when they did, I was going to be ready. The blue light from the laptop screen cast long shadows across my home office. It was past 3 in the morning. My eyes burned, and a dull ache throbbed at the base of my skull. But I could not pull my gaze away from the spreadsheet illuminated on the monitor. Julian was not just an incompetent wealth manager who had lost his clients' money in a volatile market. He was malicious. To understand the sheer toxicity of what Julian had attempted, you have to understand the mechanics of a short sell. When an investor shorts a market, they are not buying a stake in a company hoping it succeeds. They are borrowing shares, selling them, and betting that the underlying asset will fail. They are actively rooting for collapse, destruction, and bankruptcy, hoping to buy the asset back at rock-bottom prices and pocket the difference. It is a predatory maneuver, and it requires a massive amount of leveraged capital. I scrolled through the trading logs connected to Julian's anonymous limited liability corporation. I traced the flow of stolen client funds. Months earlier, long before Julian had ever met Liam, long before Liam had parked his old Ford truck in my parents' driveway, Julian had executed a massive, highly leveraged short sell. He had not targeted tech startups or international shipping conglomerates. He had targeted local government debt. Julian had bet heavily against municipal infrastructure bonds in the tri-state area. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. I knew those bonds. I knew exactly what those financial instruments funded. Those specific municipal bonds were issued by local county governments to pay for the maintenance, repair, and expansion of city transit grids. They were the exact bonds that funded the contracts awarded to Bennett Heavy Fleet Solutions. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Julian had actively attempted to bankrupt the very sector that employed my fiancé. He had placed millions of dollars on a bet that the local infrastructure would fail, that companies like Liam's would lose their municipal funding, and that garages would shut down. He wanted the system to crash so he could buy back the debt for pennies on the dollar and collect a massive payout. He had tried to destroy Liam's industry without even knowing Liam owned it. But the market did not crash. The infrastructure bonds held strong. The cities continued to pay their contractors, the garages stayed open, and the transit grids kept moving. Because the bonds remained stable, Julian's highly leveraged short position collapsed. The brokerages initiated margin calls, demanding Julian cover the borrowed funds. He could not. The debt swallowed his firm whole, triggering the suspension of his license and the tidal wave of civil lawsuits from the clients whose money he had stolen to fund his predatory bet. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the room pressing against my ears. The audacity was staggering. Julian had engineered his own destruction by betting against the working class. And when the margin calls came due, when the threat of criminal indictment loomed over his head, he had sat at a table at the Capitol Grill, wearing a bespoke suit, and begged the very man whose industry he had tried to bankrupt to bail him out. He needed $800,000 from Liam to pay off the debt caused by his failed attempt to destroy Liam's livelihood. My hands moved over the keyboard with practiced, ruthless efficiency. I did not feel sorrow for my family. I did not feel a lingering sense of familial obligation. I felt the cold, sharp focus of an auditor preparing a final judgment. I hit the print command. The laser printer in the corner of the office hummed to life. I watched as the pages slid into the output tray. I gathered the documents one by one. First, the notice of default on my parents' primary mortgage, proving my father's corporate director persona was funded by a high-interest secondary loan he could no longer afford. Second, the regulatory notice confirming the suspension of Julian's brokerage license for gross negligence. Third, the civil court dockets detailing the lawsuits from former clients, demanding the $800,000 settlement to avoid criminal prosecution. Fourth, the trading logs from the Shell Corporation, highlighting the dates and the specific municipal bonds Julian had tried to short. Finally, I picked up the printed email Liam had brought home earlier that evening, the anonymous complaint Sophia had sent to the Department of Public Works, attempting to get Liam fired because her husband's extortion attempt had failed. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a heavy, thick manila folder. I placed the stack of papers inside, aligned the edges perfectly, and closed the cover. I ran my hand over the smooth cardboard. This folder was no longer just a collection of financial records. It was a weapon. It was the definitive proof that the Garcia family was a fraudulent enterprise, a moral bankruptcy built on a foundation of lies, entitlement, and malice. I turned off the laptop and left the dark office. The next morning, Liam was sitting at the kitchen island drinking coffee when I walked in. He wore a clean gray t-shirt and dark jeans, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked up, his dark eyes scanning my face. He saw the dark circles under my eyes and the rigid set of my jaw. "Did you find it?" he asked, setting his mug down. I set the manila folder on the granite counter between us. "I found all of it," I said. I opened the folder and walked him through the documents. I showed him the foreclosure notices, the suspended license, the pending criminal indictment, and the trading logs. I watched his face as I explained Julian's short sell against the municipal infrastructure bonds. Liam did not shout. He did not slam his fist against the counter. He listened to my explanation with a terrifying, absolute stillness, the kind of stillness a predator adopts right before it strikes. When I finished, he looked down at the stack of papers. He reached out and traced the edge of the folder with his calloused thumb. "He bet against the garages," Liam said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous rumble. "He bet against the men turning wrenches. And now he wants the men turning wrenches to pay his legal bills," I replied. Liam looked up at me. "So, what is the play, underwriter?" "We wait," I said, closing the folder. "They are cornered. Julian has 30 days to pay that settlement before the plaintiffs go to the district attorney. My parents are 90 days past due on their mortgage. Sophia's sabotage email failed. They have exhausted their covert options. They are going to have to make a direct move. They will try one last desperate maneuver to get their hands on your assets." I took my coffee mug to the sink. "And when they do, we will let them spring the trap." I did not have to wait long. The silence from my family lasted through the rest of the week. No texts from Victoria, no phone calls from Sophia, no bottles of scotch from Richard. They were regrouping. They were calculating their final offensive. On Monday morning, while I was reviewing an insurance claim at my desk, my personal email inbox pinged with a high-priority notification. The sender was Richard Garcia. The subject line read, "Urgent family meeting required." I opened the message. The tone was formal, devoid of any familial warmth. It read like a corporate summons. Isabella, we require a family meeting at our house this Sunday at 2 p.m. We have hired an independent family wealth advisor to help structure our collective assets moving forward to ensure the stability of the Garcia estate. Liam must attend. Your presence is non-negotiable. Richard. I read the email twice. A cold smile touched the corners of my mouth. An independent family wealth advisor, structuring collective assets. They were not asking for a loan anymore. They were setting up a legal ambush. They had hired a professional to try and trick Liam into signing away his capital under the guise of family estate planning. I picked up my phone and forwarded the email to Liam. I added one sentence of my own to the top of the message. The trap is set. Liam replied less than a minute later. Bring the folder. The invitation to my parents' house was not a request. It was a summons, delivered with the desperate authority of people who believed they still held the high ground. Sunday afternoon arrived, bringing a sharp, bitter chill to the Connecticut air. Liam and I pulled into the sweeping driveway of my parents' colonial home exactly at 2 o'clock. The slate gray Mercedes sat perfectly angled near the garage. Sophia's luxury SUV was parked close to the front steps. I sat in the passenger seat of Liam's old Ford for a moment, looking at the manicured lawn and the pristine white pillars flanking the front door. The house was a monument to a lie. Behind the immaculate brick facade, the mortgage was in default, the credit cards were maxed out, and the owners were preparing to commit fraud to keep the lights on. I reached down and picked up the heavy manila folder resting on the floorboard. I held it tightly against my chest. Liam killed the engine. He did not ask if I was ready. He knew I was. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching against the gravel, and walked around to open my door. We walked up the front steps together. I did not knock. I turned the brass handle and pushed the door open. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with manufactured tension. My family was assembled with deliberate, theatrical precision. Richard stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed over a cashmere sweater. Victoria sat rigid on the edge of the velvet sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sophia and Julian occupied the matching armchairs across the room. Julian looked pale. The bespoke suit hung slightly loose on his frame, a physical manifestation of his impending legal ruin. They were not alone. Sitting in the center of the arrangement, occupying the large leather wingback chair, was a man I did not recognize. He appeared to be in his late 50s. He wore a gray suit that looked expensive from a distance, but revealed cheap, shiny fabric under the harsh living room lights. A leather briefcase rested on the floor beside his polished shoes. Richard stepped forward, assuming his role as the corporate director of the family. Isabella. Liam, my father said, his voice flat and authoritative, "Thank you for coming. Please, take a seat on the sofa next to Victoria." We walked into the room, but we did not sit down. Liam stood behind the sofa, resting his hands lightly on the backrest. I remained standing beside him, keeping the manila folder hidden inside my leather tote bag. "I prefer to stand," Liam said. His voice was a calm, low rumble that seemed to vibrate against the crystal glassware on the side tables. "What is the agenda, Richard?" My father's jaw tightened. He did not like the defiance, but he could not afford to enforce his authority. He needed the man standing in front of him. Richard gestured toward the stranger in the wingback chair. "We have asked Mr. Sterling to join us today. He is an independent family wealth advisor and a licensed mediator. Julian brought him in to help us structure the Garcia family estate." I looked at the stranger. A licensed mediator brought in by a man whose brokerage license was currently suspended for gross negligence. The irony was suffocating. Mr. Sterling offered a practiced, reassuring smile. He leaned forward, retrieved a thick stack of legal documents from a sleek leather portfolio on the coffee table, and squared the edges against the glass. "It is a pleasure to meet you both," Sterling said, his voice smooth and heavily polished. "I specialize in high net worth family asset protection. Richard and Julian have retained my services to ensure the collective wealth of this family is insulated against market volatility." Sterling slid the thick legal document across the glass coffee table, pushing it directly toward where Liam was standing. "This is a comprehensive family asset protection trust," Sterling continued, tapping the top page with a gold fountain pen. "We are establishing a unified financial front. By signing this agreement, Liam, you will be integrating your commercial enterprise into the broader Garcia portfolio. You will be agreeing to cross-collateralize your business assets with Richard and Julian's holdings. This structure ensures mutual growth, minimizes tax liabilities, and most importantly, protects Isabella's future inheritance." The silence in the living room was absolute. I stared at the document resting on the glass table. I did not need to read the fine print to know exactly what it was. It was a complete, predatory scam. They were not setting up a wealth protection trust. They were trying to legally trick Liam into becoming a financial guarantor for their crippling debt. Cross-collateralization meant that if Julian defaulted on his impending $800,000 settlement, or if Richard's house went into foreclosure, the creditors could legally seize Liam's business assets to cover the losses. They were asking the CEO of a multi-million-dollar enterprise to co-sign the debt of a disgraced broker and a delinquent middle manager, all under the guise of family unity. Victoria leaned forward, offering a tight, brittle smile. "It is standard procedure for families of our standing, Liam. We all pool our resources to protect the legacy. Julian and Sophia have already signed their portion. Richard and I have contributed the equity of this house." I almost laughed out loud. The equity of a house that was 90 days past due on a second mortgage. "If you truly love Isabella," Victoria added, her voice dropping into a manipulative, maternal register, "you will sign the trust to prove you are a team player. You will prove that you are truly one of us." The manipulation was textbook. They were attempting to weaponize my relationship with Liam, using my perceived future inheritance as leverage to extort his present capital. They expected him to fold under the pressure of the room. They expected him to sign the papers without consulting an outside attorney, intimidated by the presence of a fake mediator in a cheap suit. Sophia leaned back in her armchair, crossing her legs. Her eyes were bright with a vindictive, triumphant gleam. She believed she had won. She believed the grease monkey was about to sign away his empire to save her husband's career. Liam looked at the document on the table. He looked at Mr. Sterling. Then he looked at my father. Liam did not shout. He did not express outrage at the blatant attempt to steal his company. He simply reached into the interior pocket of his canvas jacket, pulled out a pair of reading glasses, and slipped them onto his face. He leaned over the sofa, picked up the thick stack of legal papers, and flipped to the second page. He read in silence for 30 seconds. "You drafted this, Sterling?" Liam asked, his tone mild and conversational. "I did," Sterling replied, puffing his chest out slightly. "It is an ironclad structure." Liam nodded slowly. He flipped to the third page. Section 4, paragraph 2. He read aloud, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "The signatory agrees to assume joint and several liability for any pre-existing debts, judgments, or civil penalties currently held by the primary trustees, Richard Garcia and Julian Vance." Liam lowered the document and looked at Julian over the rim of his glasses. "Are you expecting a civil penalty, Julian?" Liam asked. Julian's face flushed a deep, panicked red. He opened his mouth, but he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. "No, of course not. It is just standard boilerplate language, protective measures." Liam tossed the thick legal document back onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, dismissive thud. He took off his reading glasses and tucked them back into his jacket pocket. It is a garbage contract, Liam said, his voice dropping the conversational tone, replaced by the cold authority of an executive addressing a failing employee. And it is a garbage pitch. You want me to collateralize a commercial fleet enterprise against a residential property and a retail brokerage. That is not wealth protection. That is a bailout. Richard stepped away from the fireplace, his face darkening with anger. How dare you speak to us this way in my home? We are offering you a seat at the table. We are elevating you. You should be honored to integrate your blue-collar operation into this family's legacy. My father was still playing the role. He was still clinging to the illusion of superiority, hoping his volume could mask his total financial vulnerability. I had heard enough. I did not wait for Victoria to add her manipulative guilt trip. I did not wait for Sophia to launch into a hysterical defense of her husband's honor. I reached into my leather tote bag and wrapped my hand around the thick manila folder. I stepped out from behind the sofa, moving to the center of the room. I stood directly between Liam and the fake mediator. I placed my manila folder directly on top of Sterling's fraudulent contract. We are not signing anything, I said. My voice was quiet, but it possessed the sharp cutting edge of an underwriter denying a fraudulent claim. The room went dead silent. The manufactured tension of the ambush evaporated, replaced immediately by the cold, heavy atmosphere of an impending execution. Sterling cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of his orchestrated meeting. Isabella, this is a complex financial arrangement. Perhaps it is best if you let the men handle the structural details. I turned my head and looked directly into Sterling's eyes. If you speak to me again, Mr. Sterling, I said, I will forward this fraudulent contract to the State Bar Association, and I will have your license revoked before you can drive out of my parents' driveway. Sterling's mouth snapped shut. He sank back into the leather wingback chair, his posture collapsing under the threat. He recognized the tone. He knew I was not bluffing. I turned my attention back to the coffee table. I rested my hand on the cover of the manila folder. I looked at my father, my mother, my sister, and the disgraced wealth manager sitting in the armchair. They had brought a fake contract to steal my fiancé's company. They had brought a fake mediator to enforce their lies. It was time to introduce them to the truth. I kept my hand flat against the heavy cardboard cover of the manila folder. The air in the living room felt thick, charged with the kind of static electricity that precedes a severe storm. Richard still stood near the fireplace, trying to project a commanding presence. Victoria sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her chin raised in expectation. Julian and Sophia occupied the matching armchairs, looking defiant, but hiding a frantic, nervous energy beneath their designer clothing. They were waiting for me to panic. They expected Liam to fold under the weight of their orchestrated legal threat. I opened the folder. The crisp white pages sat in perfect alignment, a chronological record of their ruin. I lifted the first sheet of paper and slid it across the smooth surface of the glass coffee table. It stopped mere inches from my father's knee. This is a formal notice of default from your primary lender, I said, my voice steady and unhurried. You are 90 days past due on the second mortgage you took out to finance that Mercedes parked in the driveway. Richard froze. The practiced, authoritative scowl vanished from his features. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin pale and slick with a sudden sheen of cold sweat. He opened his mouth, but his corporate bluster had evaporated. He stared at the bank logo printed at the top of the page, unable to force a single word past his lips. You do not have a legacy to protect, Dad, I continued, letting the truth hang in the quiet room. You have a foreclosure hearing scheduled for next month. You brought us here to steal Liam's equity to save a house you already lost. Victoria gasped, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. She turned toward her husband, her eyes wide with shock. Richard, what is she talking about? I did not give them time to argue. I reached back into the folder, pulled the second set of documents from the stack, and pushed them directly toward Julian. "This is a verified printout from the State Financial Regulatory Board," I announced, keeping my eyes locked on my brother-in-law. "And underneath it is the civil court docket from the county courthouse." Julian stared at the papers. His shoulders slumped, the crisp lines of his bespoke suit suddenly looking like borrowed armor on a defeated soldier. He shrank back into the upholstery. "Julian is not spinning off a new boutique firm," I told the room, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "His brokerage license is suspended. He is facing 3 active lawsuits from former clients for gross fiduciary negligence. He needs $800,000 to pay a secret settlement and avoid a federal criminal indictment." Sophia whipped her head toward her husband. "Julian," she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling, "is that true?" He did not answer her. He could not look away from the printed proof of his impending imprisonment. He squeezed his eyes shut and buried his face in his hands. "It gets worse," I said, drawing the third set of papers from the folder. I dropped the trading logs directly in the center of the glass table. The numbers and data column stared up at the family, a digital ledger of predatory greed. "These are the archived market logs from a shell corporation registered to your home address, Julian," I explained. I watched his head snap up, sheer terror radiating from his expression. "Before you even met Liam, you took your client's money and executed a highly leveraged short sell. You bet against municipal infrastructure bonds in the tri-state area." I let the weight of the financial jargon settle over the room, ensuring they understood the depth of the betrayal. "You tried to bankrupt the exact sector that funds Liam's company," I said. "You tried to destroy the municipal garages and the men turning wrenches so you could pocket the difference. But the market held. Your margin calls came due, and you destroyed your own career." I looked at my mother, who was now clutching the armrest of the sofa as if the floor was tilting beneath her. "He tried to torch Liam's industry without knowing Liam owned it," I said, pointing a finger at Julian. "And when the bill came due, he sat at a steakhouse, ordered an expensive bottle of wine, and begged the man he tried to ruin to bail him out." A quiet, pathetic sound escaped Julian's throat. He looked like a ghost. The polished wealth manager persona was dead, leaving only a terrified criminal waiting for his sentence. Sophia stood up, her face flushed a dark, angry red. She was the golden child, and her reality was crumbling in front of her eyes. She refused to accept defeat. "You are lying," Sophia screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "You manufactured all of this because you are jealous. You are just trying to ruin us to make yourself feel superior." I looked at my sister. She had demanded I pay for her floral arrangements, while her own life collapsed in secret. She had posted photographs to humiliate the man I loved. She had 0 leverage left, yet she continued to fight. I pulled the final piece of paper from the manila folder. I did not slide this one across the table. I held it up, keeping the printed email header visible for everyone in the room to see. "Tuesday morning," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her hysterics. "You sent an anonymous email to the Department of Public Works. You fabricated a story about Liam harassing women in public. You demanded the city revoke his municipal contracts." Sophia's arm dropped to her side. Her mouth fell open. The vindictive fire in her eyes extinguished instantly, replaced by a cold, paralyzing dread. "You thought you were triggering a secret government investigation," I continued, stepping around the coffee table to stand closer to her. "You did not realize that city officials do not investigate anonymous spam. They forward those complaints directly to the vendor to handle." Sophia shook her head, taking a slow step backward. "The city forwarded your email directly to Liam's inbox, Sophia," I said, letting the words land like physical blows. "You complained to the CEO about the CEO. It took me less than 5 minutes to trace the internet protocol address right back to your living room." She sank back into her armchair, her body going entirely limp. The realization of her own profound stupidity washed over her features. She had handed us the evidence of her defamation on a silver platter. The silence in the living room returned, but it was no longer a theatrical pause designed to build tension. It was the suffocating, heavy quiet of total devastation. The polished facade of the Garcia family lay stripped away, leaving nothing but desperation, fraud, and malice exposed under the bright overhead lights. The fake mediator, Mr. Sterling, recognized a losing battle. He silently picked up his leather briefcase, stood up from the wingback chair, and hurried out the front door without uttering a single syllable. No one tried to stop him. He knew his presence was a liability, and he fled the scene to protect his own fake credentials. Victoria broke first. The rigid, arrogant matriarch crumbled into pieces. She slid off the edge of the velvet sofa, her knees hitting the expensive Persian rug. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her carefully applied makeup. It was not the weeping of a mother feeling remorse for her actions. It was the visceral, unfiltered panic of a cornered animal realizing the trap had failed and the hunters were gone. "Isabella, please," Victoria sobbed, reaching a trembling hand out toward my shoes. "We were just trying to survive. We are losing the house. Julian is going to prison. We have nothing left. Liam has millions. He has the capital to fix this. How can you stand there and watch your own blood drown?" I looked down at the woman who had raised me. I searched my heart for a shred of pity, a lingering sense of familial obligation, or a desire to offer comfort. I found nothing. The vault was empty. "You boycotted my engagement party because my fiancé had dirt on his hands," I said, looking down at her tear-stained face. "You called him a mistake. You booked a country club behind my back to hide his friends in the shadows. You tried to humiliate us in front of the entire extended family." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of my father, who was staring blankly at the default notice, and my sister, who was shrinking into the upholstery. "And when you found out he had money," I continued, "you tried to steal his company to save yourselves. You tried to ruin his livelihood to stroke your own fragile egos." I slung my leather tote bag over my shoulder. "You do not want a family," I said, the finality of the statement ringing through the quiet room. "You want a hostage, and I am done paying the ransom." I turned my back on them. I reached out and took Liam's large, calloused hand in mine. His grip was warm, solid, and safe. He did not say a word to the people sitting in the living room. They were no longer worth his breath. We walked out the front door, leaving it wide open behind us, and we did not look back. The morning after we walked out of my parents' living room, the first thing I did was call a local locksmith. A professional arrived in a white van before 8 o'clock. He replaced the brass deadbolts on our front and back doors, installing heavy-duty security locks. The sharp, heavy click of the new tumblers sliding into place was the most comforting sound I had ever heard. It was the physical manifestation of a permanent boundary. The digital boundary required a bit more effort. My phone began ringing shortly after sunrise. The caller identification flashed Victoria's name over and over again. I did not answer. I let every single call route directly to voicemail. Over the course of 48 hours, my mother left 17 audio messages. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of tea and listened to them in chronological order. She cycled through a frantic array of tactics, desperately trying to find the key that would unlock my bank account. The first few messages were authoritative commands, ordering me to return home and fulfill my obligations. When those went ignored, the tone shifted to high-pitched weeping, begging me to remember the sacrifices she had made for my upbringing. The final voicemails descended into sheer venom. She threatened to sue us for emotional distress. She threatened to drag Liam's name through the mud. She was drowning, and she was furious that I refused to throw her a rope. I did not delete the messages. As a commercial underwriter, I know the value of preserving the paper trail. I downloaded the audio files, transferred them to a secure, encrypted flash drive, and locked the drive inside the hallway safe right next to Liam's diamond appraisal. Then I opened my phone settings, selected the contact profiles for Richard, Victoria, Sophia, and Julian, and hit block. The silence that followed was profound. The relentless, suffocating pressure of the Garcia family vanished, leaving behind a clean, open space where I could finally breathe. Without Liam's capital to serve as a bailout, the financial collapse of my family proceeded with terrifying, mathematical certainty. Gossip travels fast in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, and the details of their ruin became public record within 3 months. The bank did not care about the pristine brick facade or the manicured lawn. A neon green foreclosure notice was taped to the front door of the colonial house. The slate gray Mercedes-Benz, the symbol of my father's corporate vanity, disappeared from the driveway in the middle of the night, reclaimed by a quiet tow truck. My parents were forced to vacate the property, retreating into a cheap rental unit 2 towns over, stripped of their country club memberships and their elite social circle. Julian narrowly avoided federal prison. The plaintiffs in his civil arbitration agreed to accept a liquidated settlement, but satisfying that debt required Julian and Sophia to surrender every liquid asset they possessed. The bespoke Italian suits were sold on luxury consignment websites. The designer handbags were pawned. Sophia and Julian filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy to shield themselves from the remaining creditors. They moved out of their sprawling home and signed a lease on a cramped second-floor walk-up apartment. The windows looked out over a paved alleyway. The golden child had lost her crown, her stage, and her audience. But poetic justice has a beautiful, razor-sharp sense of irony. It does not just balance the scales. It forces the guilty to carry the weight of their own arrogance. Sophia needed a paycheck. The country club connections she had relied upon for her entire adult life evaporated the moment the bankruptcy became public. No one wanted to hire the disgraced wife of a fraudulent broker. Her options were severely limited. Desperation forced her to apply for an entry-level clerical position. She was hired as a data entry clerk. She took a job with the Hartford Department of Public Works. I heard the details from a vendor relations manager Liam worked with at the city offices. Sophia sits in a beige, fabric-walled cubicle under the harsh hum of fluorescent lighting. She clocks in at 8 o'clock in the morning and sits on a cheap plastic chair. Her primary administrative duty is managing the accounts payable portal for municipal contractors. Every Tuesday morning, the maintenance invoices for the city transit grid land in her digital inbox. She has to open the files. She has to look at the embossed corporate letterhead. She has to type the vendor name into the municipal payment system, Bennett Heavy Fleet Solutions. She has to verify the billing contact, Liam Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. And then my sister has to authorize the routing transfer. She sits in her windowless cubicle and processes 6-figure payments, funneling staggering amounts of taxpayer funds directly into the bank accounts of the very enterprise she tried to destroy. Every single keystroke is a reminder of her hubris. She earns a minimum wage hourly rate to facilitate the immense wealth of the man she called a grease monkey. She tried to get him fired, and now she works for the department that signs his checks. Liam and I never drove past her office. We never gloated. We simply moved forward with our lives, building a foundation based on honesty and mutual respect. We got married the following spring. We did not book the Connecticut Heritage Club. We did not want a sterile ballroom filled with superficial acquaintances judging the floral arrangements. We rented an expansive open-air timber pavilion situated on the edge of a deep blue lake. The weather was perfect. A crisp, clean breeze rolled off the water, carrying the scent of pine trees and the rich aroma of the artisan barbecue smokers set up on the lawn. There were no fake wealth managers in attendance. There were no tense, hostile glares from the head table, and there were no empty chairs. 75 people filled the wooden benches. It was Liam's crew, our loyal friends, and the people who had proven their worth through actions rather than titles. They wore comfortable clothes. They laughed from their chests. They celebrated our union with a fierce, genuine joy that cannot be purchased or faked. I wore a simple, elegant silk gown. Liam wore a tailored dark jacket and a crisp white shirt. But when I looked down, as we stood beneath the floral archway, I saw the scuffed toes of his favorite leather work boots. He kept them on, a quiet, grounded tribute to the man he was and the empire he had built with his own 2 hands. When we exchanged our vows, I looked out at the crowd. I saw the faces of the men and women who had shown up for us at the brewery. I felt a profound sense of security. I learned a very hard lesson about human nature that year. My profession taught me how to identify a bad investment on paper. My family taught me how to identify a bad investment in life. Family is not determined by a bloodline. Shared genetics do not grant someone unrestricted access to your peace, your bank account, or your future. Family is an action. It is defined by the people who show up to your brewery party when everyone else stays home. It is defined by the people who stand beside you when the masks come off and the truth is laid bare on a glass coffee table. Patience is a virtue, but preparation is a shield. If you ever find yourself sitting across from people who measure your worth by what they can extract from you, do not argue with them. Do not beg them to see your value. Gather your evidence, lock your doors, and sever the tie. Cutting toxic people out of your life is not a betrayal. It is the ultimate return on investment. That is my story. 1 insurance appraisal, 1 manila folder, and 1 locked door that changed the trajectory of my entire life. If you have ever had to audit your own inner circle to find your peace, share this video. Drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time. The loudest sound in the world is not a scream, a shattered plate, or the slamming of a door. It is the heavy, metallic click of a new deadbolt sliding into place. When that sound echoes through a quiet house, it signifies more than just a physical barrier. It marks the death of an illusion. It is the moment the dust settles, leaving you standing in the quiet aftermath of a family's collapse, forcing you to look at the wreckage and ask, how did the people who were supposed to build my foundation end up setting the fire? Looking back at the ruins of the Garcia family, the deepest tragedy is not the financial bankruptcy. Money comes and goes. The true tragedy lies in the profound generational failure of parenting. In American culture, we are often sold a very specific, highly curated version of the dream. We are told that success looks like a pristine colonial home, a leased luxury vehicle in the driveway, and a country club membership. But traditional family values were never meant to be measured by a zip code or a brand name. They were meant to be rooted in honesty, fairness, and the quiet, unglamorous work of raising children to be resilient, empathetic humans. Richard and Victoria did not raise children. They curated a gallery. They confused optics with character, and in doing so, they abandoned their most fundamental responsibility as parents, to provide long-term moral guidance. When parents prioritize image over emotional awareness, they do not just hide their flaws, they pass the bill down to their children. By living a life financed by secret debt and maintaining a facade of elite status, my parents taught us that the truth was a liability and appearances were the only currency that mattered. They failed to teach us that true wealth is found in a calloused hand, an honest day's labor, and a promise kept. Instead, they taught us to sneer at a pair of scuffed work boots and worship a bespoke suit, blinding themselves to the fact that the suit was empty and the boots were building an empire. But their greatest failure was their lack of fairness. In traditional family structures, a parent's duty is to love unconditionally and guide equally. Richard and Victoria divided their children into utility roles. They created a golden child to display and a safety net to exploit. Sophia's current reality, sitting in a windowless municipal cubicle, processing the invoices of the man she tried to destroy, feels like poetic justice. But on a deeper level, it is the result of profound parental neglect. By making her the golden child, my parents robbed my sister of the opportunity to develop a spine. They funded her vanity, shielded her from consequence, and taught her that she was inherently deserving of the world simply for existing. They loved the reflection of themselves they saw in Sophia, but they never loved Sophia enough to teach her how to survive reality. They handed her a crown of glass, and when it inevitably shattered, she possessed no tools to sweep up the shards. Her entitlement was not just a character flaw. It was a learned behavior, meticulously crafted by parents who refused to hold her accountable. On the other side of that toxic coin was the role they assigned to me. When parents rely on one child to be the quiet, responsible one, the one who pays the property taxes, bails out the mistakes, and swallows the insults to keep the peace, they are committing a quiet form of emotional theft. A child should never be their parents' retirement plan or their siblings' crisis manager. When a family structure lacks fairness, resentment becomes the mortar holding the bricks together. I was expected to fund their illusion while swallowing their disdain for the man I loved. It took a thick manila folder of hard evidence to finally break the spell, but the truth is, the spell should never have been cast. Parenting requires emotional awareness. It requires looking at your children and seeing who they actually are, not who you need them to be to impress your neighbors. It requires the courage to say, "We cannot afford this," instead of taking out a second mortgage to finance a lie. Honesty is the only soil in which a healthy family can grow. If Richard and Victoria had simply possessed the humility to admit their financial struggles, if they had valued the dignity of hard work over the illusion of unearned luxury, the entire tragedy could have been avoided. But pride is a heavy anchor, and it will drag an entire bloodline to the bottom of the ocean if no one has the courage to cut the rope. Liam understood this implicitly. He drove an old Ford truck because it carried the memory of his father. He wore his work boots into a sterile dining room because he possessed the quiet dignity of a man who knew his own worth. He did not need to shout his net worth from the rooftops because genuine character does not require an audience. That is the kind of long-term guidance every child deserves to witness. The lesson that your value is determined by the promises you keep and the respect you show to others, regardless of their title. We all carry the weight of the people who raised us. Some of us are given a map and a compass. Others are handed a shovel and told to dig. Recognizing the difference is the first step toward breaking generational cycles of dysfunction. You cannot heal a family dynamic that relies on your silence to survive. Sometimes the most profound act of love you can offer your future children is to walk away from the environment that tried to break you. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to recognize the toxic patterns disguised as family traditions, you are not alone. There is a profound strength in learning to draw a line in the sand and choosing your own peace over someone else's performance. For more stories about navigating the complex, often painful realities of family dynamics, boundary setting, and reclaiming your life, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel Aura Vengeance. We are building a community for those who have learned that the truth is always worth the cost. As the sun sets tonight, casting long shadows over pristine suburban lawns, take a moment to look out at the quiet houses lining your street. Behind those perfect brick facades and manicured hedges, there are countless families sitting around heavy mahogany tables, trading their authenticity for the illusion of success. There are golden children wearing heavy, fragile crowns, and there are quiet safety nets wondering when they will finally be allowed to put down the checkbook. You can never truly know who is living a genuine life and who is just one margin call away from total collapse. But as you stand in your own hallway, listening to the solid, reassuring click of your own deadbolt, you might realize something quiet and powerful. The greatest legacy you will ever leave is not the house you lived in or the car you drove. It is the truth you chose to live by, and the courage it took to finally lock the door on the lie.